Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about patch 10.0.7. Blizzard put out a post 2 days ago called Dragonflight to 10.0.7 content update is coming soon. First question first, when is soon? For Blizzard, this usually means between 2 weeks and 4 weeks. If they had a definite date, they would obviously say it, and that date would be generally 2 weeks or less. You know, if it was coming out March 14th, they would probably just say March 14th. They usually give a minimum of a week's notice, but usually more like 2. Because of that, I'd like to assume that this will probably be in the back half of March. It's possible this might not land even until April, but I'd be willing to bet about March 21st, maybe 28th, something like that. And that's great because there's a lot of cool stuff in this patch. The first thing that they emphasize here is the return of the Forbidden Reach. The Forbidden Reach is the Evoker starting area, and something that Blizzard's always done that I've kind of hated is they'll create these great starting zones, you know, Kazan for the Goblins, the Wandering Isle for Pandaren, Worgen's starting area. They're great. They have this wonderful art and these really iconic quests that you love doing. You go through them once and then you never go back there ever again. Sending us right back to the Forbidden Reach very shortly after getting to discover Evoker and play around with it. Maybe people haven't played an Evoker yet. You know, getting to see that area and getting to fly around there and do quests there, kill rares there, get achievements there is very satisfying for me. Like, for one, it's a good zone, but also I like that they're using the areas and concepts that they've created instead of making them, using them once, and then tossing them aside. I think this represents a really good, healthy shift in Blizzard's philosophy for designing content. Next up is the addition of heritage armor sets for orcs and humans, which are way overdue. They have some pretty good artwork here, showing off the human sets, and some really impressive artwork for the orc sets, I have to say. I'm glad that this is happening. It's kind of a bummer that Kultiran and Magar orcs have overshadowed regular humans and regular orcs for so long. And, you know, every race should have heritage armor sets in the game. I'm glad to see that they haven't forgotten that whole concept. But, you know, Pandaren armor win. Blizzard's also added a Furbolg faction, the Winter Pelt. There were some quests with them in the Azure Span that kind of hinted at that being a faction, but nothing had been, you know, explorable on that front yet, and that's going to be fleshed out in patch 10.0.7. They're also expanding Monk out to the 3 races that can't play it, you know, Goblin, Worgen, and Lightforged Draenei. Woohoo, I'm sure there will be dozens of people who are ready to be a Goblin Monk. There's also a quest line in the Anaran Plains with Bane Bloodhoof, who is one of my favorite characters, so I'll be excited to check that out. There is a refresh to the Recruit a Friend system, which has some of my favorite armor in the game. It is the armor that I use on all my characters. You technically speaking don't have to have a friend. You can recruit yourself. It does require, you know, quite a bit of gold, or if you want to spend money, I guess like $180 or so to recruit yourself instead of a friend. But the end result is you get a pretty sweet armor set, a pretty cool couple of mounts, and a little monkey pet, so that's nice. They are doing a refresh on it, so presumably there's going to be some sort of new armor. I guess we'll find out more as this gets closer to coming out, though. Now, one thing that Blizzard kind of let slip under the radar with their big post about this patch was the addition of a new dragon riding skill, Aerial Halt, and a passive that supports it, Airborne Recovery. Now, with the addition of the Forbidden Reach, they also have added in 8 new dragon glyphs to fly around and pick up, which I did over a handful of minutes. It was pretty fun. This is a pretty fun zone to fly around in. And Aerial Halt and Airborne Recovery work together. You know, Aerial Halt is the active skill, Airborne Recovery is the passive skill that supports it. And the way it basically works is like a handbrake for your dragon. I'm gonna fly along here, I'm zooming, I hit Aerial Halt, boom, stop right dead in the air. And thanks to Airborne Recovery, that causes, hitting that handbrake not just to be like all brakes no gas, but also it gives you back one of your vigor charges. So I'll get up in the air, burn up some vigor just to show off again. Flying. I'll even waste some more vigor just to really show it off. And handbrake. Yeah, pretty nice. This is something that I've seen lots of people asking for. You know, is there a way to slow down? I really don't like the slamming into the ground at high speed. And while you can aim down and hit space to like slow down, that's really kind of a crummy way to do it. And also it burns a vigor. And being able to just hit the handbrake, not have to like tilt down and fly up at the same time, and you get a vigor back, that's great. Nice soft landing. I've definitely been using that while flying around this zone a little bit, trying to land on things, you know, land on quest items or whatever. It's pretty cool. And again, a very highly requested feature, so I'm glad to see that be a priority for Blizzard. Now, these aren't the entirety of the changes happening in the patch. There's also a bunch of class tuning occurring. Of course, because, you know, it's a World of Warcraft patch. There should be class tuning. To give sort of a brief overview rather than getting bogged down in the weeds, Death Knight, you know, DPS Death Knight, that is, Blood's fine, but DPS Death Knight's getting some quality of life improvements and some damage increases. Resto Druid is getting a bit of a revamp. Evoker getting some changes. Hunter's getting a pretty significant change to nerf the power of the gun that comes from, or the bow that comes from Razageth, and then buff the base class up to compensate for that, so that there's a little bit less of a haves and have-nots between people who have that, you know, unique build enabling item, which I think is a really good change. Mistweaver's getting some significant buffs, but it's Mistweaver, so who cares? Pally, I will come back to. Pally is getting a massive amount of changes. I'm just going to scroll down for a while. We're still in Pally. Okay, we've made it into protection. Now Ret, still Pally, still Pally, still Pally. This is a phone book. Still Pally, and finally some changes to Priest. Some pretty significant buffs to Resto and Elemental Shaman, which is a good thing, and some changes to Warlock. Warriors, no changes. They're fine. Now, Pally's the class that I really want to zero in on a bit more because their changes are so dramatic. Blizzard went out of their way to even write up a full post acknowledging the issues with Ret Pally. Basically, it boils down to there are too many keybinds, the damage isn't good enough, it's not tanky enough, it's slow. Everything that could be bad about a spec, Ret Pally is embodied. That's not great. So they've done a pretty significant redesign of the way that Ret Pally works, and supposedly it is much better. Now, I think Prot Pally has also been a big beneficiary of all of the attention that Ret has gotten. And while Ret has been a fairly underwhelming spec this expansion, to put it mildly, Prot Pally's been in great shape. You know, Prot Pally was used in the World 3rd Mythic Razageth kill. Prot Pally has very clearly been the second best overall tank in Mythic Plus this expansion. Just to kind of look at some of the high-level rankings on Raider.io, you know, this is what it looks like. Prot Warrior, Prot Pally, Warrior, Pally, 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 Warrior. You know, if you go through the first, you know, the top 100 pushers, it's going to be a mix of Warrior and Pally, relatively even a little bit more Warrior, obviously. And then a light sprinkling of DK, DH, and Monk. No bears, but just, you know, Pally, Pally, Pally everywhere. Because it's a great tank in Mythic Plus. Now, it has a limitation in Raid, and that main limitation is it has to block to mitigate damage super effectively. It doesn't have a huge health pool, unlike Prot Warrior, where you can ignore pain to kind of throw a shield over your health pool. Pally doesn't really have anything to shield over the top of their health pool. Your health pool is what you get. And that has always held them back a little bit in raids, but that I think is being compensated for with some really awesome talent changes that are happening in this patch. Now, rather than getting too deep in the weeds, I kind of just want to hit in on the highlights here in the talent changes that are happening for Prot Pally. And the first one that I really want to emphasize is Sanctified Plates. This is a 20% armor, 10% stamina, and 10% avoidance buff that's just basically being given to Paladin almost for free. I mean, technically you still have to spend a point on it, but the pathing to it is incredibly easy. There's not really any compensating nerfs that are happening. This is just a big old buff to Pally. There are more buffs to Pally. Lightforge Blessing causes you to heal yourself and your allies whenever you Shield of the Righteous, which you do all the time. Crusader's Reprieve causes you to heal whenever you Crusader Strike, which again, you do all the time. You also get a little bit more auto attack range, which is pretty good. One other thing that I haven't really seen mentioned in many places, I saw it mentioned once in some patch notes, that hammer's going crazy, is the removal of Divine Seed from the global cooldown. Look at that. I'm on the global cooldown right now. I'm going to Word of Glory myself and Divine Steed at the same time. Isn't that nice? Yeah, pretty amazing. Just a huge quality of life improvement, and that's for all Pallies, actually. Again, everybody's benefiting because they're buffing red. You love to see it. One other thing I almost forgot to mention here is that Retribution Aura is being redesigned, and that's the case for all Paladins. So for any sort of organized raid group, I think you're going to want to run 2 Pallies now. You're going to want to run one for Retribution Aura because, as you can see here, it's a raid-wide damage increase. Anytime somebody takes more than 30% of their health in a single hit, so, you know, basically any major raid mechanic that's targeted on somebody, it triggers a raid-wide damage and healing increase, and then there's a 30-second internal cooldown. So presumably there's not going to be a lot of value for stacking a bunch of Pallies running Red Aura, you know, your cooldown lock either way, but you're going to want to have one Red Aura Pally and obviously one Devotion Aura Pally, because both of those are pretty nice. Good to have. There are some other notable talent improvements. Of Dusk and Dawn, I think, is the most significant one in the left tree. Previously, you know, as it works currently, using Dusk and Dawn is powerful. It's a good set of buffs, but it's a little unwieldy. You have to hit 5 Holy Power to trigger Dawn. You have to hit 0 Holy Power to trigger Dusk. They're 20-second buffs, damage and defensive buff. You have to keep them up all the time, so you're kind of ping-ponging between the two extremes on Holy Power. It's being reworked to just simply give you Dawn whenever you use 3 Holy Power generating abilities. So Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, the Blessed Hammer, you know, you throw those out in any configuration, you'll get Blessing of Dawn. It does stack up to 2 times to give you a little like protection over any sort of rotational inconsistencies or whatever. And then Blessing of Dusk is just applied for 10 seconds whenever you consume Blessing of Dawn by, you know, using Shield of the Righteous or Word of Glory. That's great. That's a significant improvement over the unwieldy, complex nature of the way that it worked before, and it still has a lot of the same great value. It also has the option of taking Fading Light, which gives you a shield when you have Blessing of Dusk for all the damage you deal with your Holy Power generators. So again, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath, Blessed Hammer. That's all really good. It's just a huge quality of life improvement to a talent that everybody already kind of likes the value of, but maybe not the functionality. And getting to have the functionality be, you know, much better just makes this a lot better overall. You're also getting Faith's Armor as an option, just a flat 20% bonus armor on top of everything else you get out of using Shield of the Righteous. It is not a rolling buff like Shield of the Righteous. So, you know, Shield of the Righteous, you can hit 3 times in rapid succession, base 4.5 second duration, but it'll add those together. Faith's Armor doesn't work that way. It's just you press it, you get armor, and that's okay. There are some other changes that have happened over in the left tree, and I'll link this talent setup in the pinned comment just so you can come play around with it. But in the interest of not dwelling too long on things that could still change, I'd like to look at some of the right-hand tree's new additions that I think are really notable and just interesting. The first one is probably Inmost Light. I think that's probably the thing that stands out the most to me as being just very compelling. Eye of Tyr is a really good defensive cooldown, you know, 25% damage reduction for 9 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown. Good. AoE damage wise, it does about as much as an Avenger Shield, but without any of the great talent synergy that Avenger Shield has, so that's been a little underwhelming. Inmost Light quadruples the damage, so now it's going to hit very hard and be useful even in single target, and it cuts another 15 seconds off the cooldown. So now it's a 25% damage reduction skill that deals a lot of damage for, you know, a 45-second cooldown, no resource cost or anything, just a good old burst damage and defensive cooldown. I think that's fantastic. Some other talent changes that have occurred in here. Resolute Defender has been shifted over from here to here, and it's been increased from 1 point to 2. So now you get quite a bit more Ardent Defender and Divine Shield cooldown reduction for using Shield of the Righteous and just playing your base rotation. Final Stand hasn't really been changed. You know, the talent configuration down here isn't that significantly different from the way it is in the current tree, but it is a lot easier to path through. There is more potential for taking some different talents, and certainly getting more juice out of your cooldown reduction talents is really good. Righteous Protector has been changed to a 1 point talent, and again, it's just kind of feeding into this really powerful archetype that Blizzard kind of made Prot Pally into in the last expansion of being this super strong cooldown reduction tank. It's one of the things that has made Prot Warrior so incredibly strong over the years. Certainly in their current moment, and it's really awesome that Pally has that as well. I think Pally is benefiting in exactly the same way. I think Pally right now, not to oversell it, I think Pally is maybe the strongest tank in Mythic Plus, even over Prot Warrior. Not having Spell Reflection is tough, but that is basically the only shortcoming that Pally really has. Having tons of Avenger Shield, the ability to just completely lock down caster mobs, and provide tons of group utility in the form of Blessing of Sacrifice, Blessing of Protection, all of that is really great. I think it's just about as useful as Prot Warrior. The one weakness that Prot Pally has had is, you know, they're not as tanky as Prot Warrior, and these talent changes really help compensate for that in a big way. You know, Prot Pally is already my favorite tank to play when I'm playing with more disorganized groups. It really is capable of carrying interrupts in a group on its own, and seeing it get buffed like this gives me a lot of hope. I genuinely think that Pally is going to be the strongest tank in the game after this patch, and I would say invest in Pally now. Start gearing yours up. If you like playing it and you like doing Mythic Plus, I would say start working on your Pally now. I think it's going to pay off in a big way. Barring any huge, horrible changes, of course. But given that this is the second rework of Pally during this PTR cycle, the first was disastrous and the second has been absolutely incredible, I think that Pally's going to come out of this looking really good. All right, I think that's about it. Thanks for watching. Work on your Pally. Bye.